Hi, my name is Balam, and in this episode, we will be looking at how to create a solution that allows offices or groups of people to process applications that come to them via some sort of web form, and that oftentimes include things like attachments, and to do more than just receive the information and look at the attachments, where we look at how we can automate the process of collecting all this information, putting it into a repository, and allow further actions all within one centralized space. We will be using Microsoft Forms, Power Automate, SharePoint, and Power Apps. And to top it off, we will go with Outlook also to automate communications with the people that submit these requests or these pieces of information. So hang in there, because first, we got to look at our intro. So the problem we're looking at is this. We need a solution that allows to effectively track and process program submissions and to communicate with stakeholders, and to do this in a simple and efficient way. So the solution we are proposing is that the users will submit applications via a Microsoft form. And in this case, they have to include a resume and one letter of recommendation. And what we propose here is to create a Power Automate flow that gets the information that gets submitted from the form, creates corresponding items in a SharePoint list, and adds the submitted documents to that SharePoint list as attachments. The important thing why we want to do this is that we want to then create a Power App on top of this that uses a SharePoint list to have a centralized repository for those applications, and that allows the processing staff to look at those applications, approve them, and along the way, send an email to the applicant once their application has been approved. So the services we will include in this, including connectors, are Microsoft Forms, SharePoint, specifically SharePoint Lists, Power Automate, and the Outlook connector. So one of the important things here is that we will be setting this up as a group rather than an individual form. So we're using a group form, and therefore the processing in Power Automate is going to be a little bit different, but there are multiple benefits in setting up this as a group form, and that is that we have a wider team that can access the solution without having to jump through a lot of hoops in terms of permissioning, and also because it keeps the management of the process under a wider umbrella rather than under a single individual. Let's take a look at how we will go about this. Some of the critical functions here and properties we will be looking at is using JSON to parse out from the form and its submission where the attachments are stored, and we will then use Power Automate to move them into a SharePoint list. Another one of the functions we will be using, or the properties that we'll be using, will be triggering emails when a component in Power Apps changes, and then creating a way in which you can filter all applications and look just at the approved or pending ones in a gallery in Power Apps. So let's go ahead and start our build. So we start the process in Microsoft Forms, but a word of caution, we don't start the process at the very top where it says new quiz or new form. Since we are creating a group form, we first navigate below to the My Groups section. And I have a lot of groups, so I need to expand that. I go to my Mayan no-code developers group. Here is where I can start a new group form. I'm not going to slow this video down because form creation is something that's relatively simple. I'm going to show you the form I created for this project. With this form, I am collecting users' full names, users' emails, and what program they're applying to, and ask them to upload a Word file or a PDF. Notice that I have restricted that here. That should be the resume, and another one that should be a letter of recommendation. Again, in this case, I have image there as a possibility. I am actually going to remove that option. And here in the file types, I'm going to uncheck image. And that is the form itself. Another thing to note is that the form is actually asking for first name or for full name and email, because even though if these are authenticated users, the system would automatically collect their name and email whenever we use Power Automate. For some unexplained reason, those fields do not become available to Power Automate, so we need to redundantly ask for them here anyway. If we go to preview, we can then complete the form to see where those files actually get stored. One of the things I do is, for tracing purposes, I actually name my sample files with the same name of the field that they're going to be uploaded. So I have here a resume sample, and I have a letter of recommendation sample. Then I click Submit, and that part is done. Now let's take a look at where those files actually get stored. If we go to the SharePoint site for the group that is actually running this form, we can find out that in their Documents section, there's a folder called Apps. In that folder, Apps, Microsoft Forms creates another folder. And for each form associated with this group, there is a corresponding folder. So we are running the form MCN Developer Interns. And there we find one folder labeled question and one folder labeled question 1. To make it easy, remember I named my files with what kind of content they were delivering. We can see that resumes are stored in folder called question, and that letters of recommendation are being stored in the folder called question 1. Now we also need to develop a list on this SharePoint site to store all the information that comes from the forms. We're going to create a blank list. We're going to call it MCN Applications List. In the title, we are going to store the applicant's name. So we go to List Settings, Title, and we name that to full name. We go back to the list. We add a field. It's going to be a text field, or we have a text field for program. And we have a text field for applicant name. While we're here, we are going to add one additional field, which is going to be whether or not their application has been approved. So let's go ahead and do that. I prefer to just do text fields. I'm going to call this approval status. And lastly, we are just going to reveal the attachments column. So here, edit the current view and going to reveal the attachments column right there. And there you go. There are the attachments. So now we're going to develop a Power Automate flow that will capture all the information from the form, and it should populate only this field, this field, this field, not the approval status. This is something that will be done later, and then bring the attachments in. But this is a stepwise process, so it will take it one at a time. Now that we have our form and our target list, let's start building the process that will automate the delivery of the information into that list. We're going to create an automated flow. So every time a new application is submitted, it automatically gets pushed to the SharePoint site and is available for review to all team members. We're going to call our flow internship application automation, and it's going to be triggered whenever the form is submitted. So the first thing it's going to ask us for is to give it the name of the form that it should be watching for. If you look at the pull-down menu here, you will notice that that form does not exist in this list. Go down to the M's, should have here at the very top, MCN Internship Development. Okay, since that form is not to be found here, we're not lost. We can always enter the form ID under custom value. And to find the form ID, it's relatively simple. All you have to do is go to your form URL, look at the URL, and find this spot that says ID equals, and then copy this bit of information all the way to the end. If you are in a different view of the form, the URLs will still give you this, except you may have some additional stuff on the back end. So make sure you just grab the ID of the form itself. So we paste that ID there to initially identify the form. Then we need to get the information that was submitted with the form with the get response details. Again, we will have to do the thing we did before. We're going to paste the form ID here. And then we're going to get that specific response, the last response that was submitted with the form. Okay, now we're ready to move those responses into the corresponding SharePoint lists. So I'm going to choose the next action or operation, and that is SharePoint. And I'm going to create an item, which means create a record in the list. The site is the Mayan No Coders, and the list name is my MCN applications list. I'm going to map the full name. I'm going to map the program they're applying to, and I'm going to map their email. I'm not putting anything in the approval status because that is not coming from the form itself. So I'm going to save it. And now I'm going to run a test. To run the test, I come here again and I enter a new name. And I submit. So it looks like it ran successfully. Let's check the SharePoint site that's associated with the form. I'm going to go to our MCN applications list. And we see that Maria applied to the beginners program. Here's her email, but there are no attachments. So we need to be able to move the attachments, the attached files that she submitted into the attachment section for this list. We're not get the information that we need because, as you might expect, everybody's going to name their files something different, and we want to be able to capture the file name that every person used for each of their required files. So we get that information from the test run, and I'm going to be able to use these two outputs here to get the name of their resume and to get the name of the letter of recommendation. So we're going to keep this in one window while we run the rest of our editing process in another window or another tab. To get that file name, we're going to use a JSON parse operation or JSON parse operation. So we're going to add a new step here. Going to have a parse operation here. The content, we're going to use first the resume, and we're going to have to make sure that what we're grabbing is the information from the form, the details from the form, not from the SharePoint site. So here's resume, and then we need to generate the schema out of the sample, which is where this comes useful. So for resume, I'm going to grab that, and I am going to paste it there. Now this parse JSON, we're going to use two of these. So we're going to name this one, going to rename this one parse JSON R. I'm going to take advantage of this and copy it while we're there. Okay, so that's for resume. So in the next step, then we need to get that file content. I'm going to get that content using the path and then using the file name that the JSON has made available to us. Notice that we're using the SharePoint content using path. Go back to the address. We know that everything is stored in our SharePoint site. And here is where it's a little bit trickier. You might be tempted to discern your path using this and then start navigating through. But I have found out that this creates problems because Power Automate does not let you edit whatever you pull out via this way. So I have already captured those paths. Remember that those files are stored here. They're apps, Microsoft Forms, MCN, developer internship question folder. So I'm going to use it here from shared documents. I go there and I'm going to paste it there. Okay, so lastly, we need to get the file name from this parsing operation here. And we use this formula. First, body, and then here in the parentheses, we use the same name as the name of the operation here on top, substituting the spaces with underscores, and then we ask for the name. So we click on update there. We click on OK there, and we save. and let's test it. Are we finding everything we need? Good, we're in good shape. So the last thing we need to do is actually put that file where it belongs. So we'll do a new step, add attachment, even if we misspelled it. Again, we look for our list, the list name, ID we get from our previous entry. Now we get, again, our file name from the JSON. So we do our first body, name again. And for file content, we use file content. So let's save and test. Everything ran the way it should be. Let's take a look at our list. So this is, I've been running several tests. This is the last test. This is Maria. And if we look at her record, here is her resume sample. This is all great, but where are the letters of recommendation? We need to basically run the same process in parallel with a few minor changes. So I'm going to accelerate through this and just stop at the relevant points. After we create the items, we're going to run a parallel branch here. And we're going to use the same parse JSON. The content in this case is going to be the form letter of recommendation. For the schema, we grab the information from our previous run history. So here's a recommendation schema. I'm gonna rename this with an L for letter of recommendation. Get our file content, our site address, our file path. It's a different file path for that one. The file path for this one is question 1, as we recall. File name, again, our JSON expression, which we should know by heart now. Now I want to make sure I did mess up my JSON in the other one. Everything looks fine. So let's save and check. Remember that every time we test, we will create a new entry. Okay, so it worked well on both sides. Let's take a look at our applicants now. We should have a new application by Maria. Here it is. So this is our old application. This is our latest one. And if we look at it now, it does have 2 attachments. Okay. So system is working fine. We're going to clean it up. We're going to delete some of these test entries, and we're just going to leave the last one. Okay, and then we're going to go back to our form and run one more entry. All right, so we submitted that. If the flow ran appropriately, we should see this appear here momentarily. And there is James Clavell. And here are his two included documents. So this gets us quite a bit into the game. Next, we're going to develop a quick app that lets us continue to manage the process. Okay, everybody. So this video ended up being a whole lot longer than I had intended for it to be, but I hope you appreciate the detail I've gone into. One of the things that is pretty obvious is that we haven't gotten even to the app building process that will then support the further set of activities associated with the application process. And I hope that's okay with you. I am going to make this a part 2, so at least you can get through this part and be ready for the app building component, which also, as it happens with many projects, I've decided to build a whole lot more features into it to make it a more useful and richer application. You can see, if you notice, I'm not even wearing the same clothes because it's been a couple of days. So one of the things I did want to share with you, though, is that I made some changes, or I made a change to our data source. If you recall, there's a section called the approval status, or a column called the approval status. That was not part of the original form. The data for this would be managed by the team who reviews the applications. What I did for this after I created this and behind the scenes is I changed the properties of the approval status form so that whenever a new entry gets created, it automatically gets pending status. So here's how I went after the fact and changed that. I went to my approvals, I looked at column settings, I went to edit, and I added the default value to pending. So this means that every application that comes in naturally will fall into the pending status. So in the next part of the video, in part 2, I'm going to show you how to take this data set and build an application that allows you to manage the process, view the submissions, and communicate with the different individuals that submitted their applications in a more streamlined and automated manner. So in the meantime, please remember to subscribe, and if you like it, give it a thumbs up. Also, this is the way in which you can get in touch with me. Always encourage you to submit comments and stay in touch. Remember that while I do this as Power Apps for higher ed, obviously there are applications outside of higher ed in a number of other spaces. So until next one.